I'm Kathy Saunders, Curator of Education at Preserve Rhode Island's Lippitt House Museum in Providence. In addition to the museum's programming that we do on history, we also do events like tonight's community conversation, which are central to our mission to promote civic engagement. In the 19th century, the Lippitt family were public servants, community volunteers, and education activists. And today, Lippitt House Museum works to encourage everyone to be an active member of their community. So tonight is the second of two conversations that look at climate change as a social justice issue. This series is a 9-year partnership with the Providence League of Women Voters. It is supported in part by a grant from the League of Women Voters Rhode Island Education Fund, and EcoRI News is the media sponsor. This program is being recorded and will be posted on Preserve Rhode Island's YouTube channel, so I ask audience members to mute and turn off your cameras. It's best to view in speaker mode since all panelists will be spotlighted. The panelist bios are posted on the Lippitt House registration webpage, and we will also put the link in the chat so we can maximize the time in our conversation with our speakers. Also, we have reserved time for questions. We want to hear from you, so please submit your questions using the chat feature during the program. For this year's conversation that look at the local actions to make Providence a more resilient community in response to climate change, we have partnered with the Southside Community Land Trust. And for the Land Trust, here is Rafini with a brief welcome.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the program tonight. I have an announcement that one of our speakers, Monica Cortez, will not be able to join us. She has careers, and one of them is she is a doula, which is a beautiful, beautiful career to have. And someone went into labor tonight. So a child may be born while we are in this program, but I want to let you know that she would not be one of the speakers tonight. My name is Rafini. I am here with Southside Community Land Trust. I'm the director of the youth program. And at Southside, we help people grow food. And I know that sounds maybe a little vague. And if you want to know some more, go on our website. And also this Saturday from 11 to 1, we have an agriculture kickoff where there are free seeds. And if you're a member, if you want to become a member, there's free seeds, compost, and workshops and stuff like that. So check us out. We're definitely a good organization within the community. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this back over to Mary Frances. Thank you very much. Peace.
Thank you, Rafini, and thank you, Kathy. The Providence League, I'm Mary Frances Coop with the Providence League of Women Voters. And we are pleased and honored to be partnering with Lippitt House and the Southside Community Land Trust in this important conversation this evening about health and environmental justice. The built environment in our communities has an important impact on the health and well-being of everyone in our community, most especially those who are the most vulnerable. It's a very important topic. It's one that the League pays great attention to. And we really hope that you will be able to get a lot out of this conversation this evening. As Kathy said, she's put the bios of our speakers into the chat, but I am going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, tell you their name and maybe their affiliation just a little tiny bit about this topic, and then we can get into some of the questions. So Vatic, let's start with you.
Sure. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Vatic Kuumba, he, him, his pronouns. I am a father. I am a partner. I'm a son. I'm also an artist, facilitator, and my connection to this work my connection to this work is I am one of the founding members of the Racial Environmental Justice Committee, which was founded here in Providence, Rhode Island. And yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation to really dig into environmental racism and environmental justice. So I'll pass it to you, Dr. Ritchie.
Thank you.
Hi. So I'm Dannie Ritchie. I'm a clinical assistant professor of family medicine, at Brown University, Alfred School of Medicine. I'm also affiliated faculty with Africana Studies, and I work on health equity and racial justice issues, social justice issues, really to improve our health, because the issues that the disparities that we have, the inequities that we have actually impact us all. And if we all want to be a healthier nation, we have to understand how we got this way and what are the issues around changing it. I also teach a course on housing. So when you look at the social determinants of health, it's where we live, learn, work, and play. And so understanding where we live, our housing, our neighborhoods, and our communities is vital to understanding, the chances we have and our health. And in environmental justice is, and environmental racism is obviously one great cause of inequity and injustice and poor health outcomes for our vulnerable BIPOC communities or disenfranchised BIPOC communities. And I'm looking forward to having that conversation and looking more at what are the root causes of where we are today.
Good. Well, since you both use the term, and we use the term environmental justice, Danny, can you just give us a sense from your perspective, what does environmental justice mean and how is it reflected in your work?
Well, I'm actually, when I think about environmental justice, it really comes from the term of environmental racism, and understanding that the conditions that a lot of communities are in are an issue of justice and injustice, and that in order for our communities to be healthier, we have to address the racism and the injustice that created it, so that we can have healthier communities. So that's what it means to me.
Great. And Vatic, is there anything you would add or talk a little bit about how maybe it informs your work?
Yeah, so for me, when I think about justice, I think about the way things should be. I think of a child being born and being happy and smiling and giggling, and the injustice that you're talking about like comes in when a person isn't able to do that. So when a child isn't able to breathe, when their lung capacity and the way that they're breathing is compromised by pollution, that's an injustice. And as we're talking about the most impacted communities suffering that injustice, that is like the root of it. And like the way that that it plays into my work is everything is environment. Like the world that we're in, everything that we're walking in and living in is our environment. And so like as a playwright, as a poet, I'm creating environments and creating spaces for people to imagine alternatives to the reality that we're living in. And so, stepping in from like environmental justice, environmental racism, and getting to that space of liberation.
Good, good. So when we think about the built environment, the civic buildings, the roads, the houses, industries, all of those things that constitute our built environment, what are the real health impacts of the built environment that people have to live with and try to overcome? Do either of you want to, Danny or Vatic, if you want, either one of you want to start, but just kind of give us some sense of that.
Okay, jump right in.
Sure, go ahead.
No, I don't. I mean, built environment has to do with how we actually arrange ourselves. So, I mean, I think that, you can go in any direction when you talk about what you use for the built environment. If you think about the materials that you use to actually, one of the issues that I'm interested in is zoning in land use. and how that has been, and how that actually creates the dangerous and toxic environments that we live in. So where we put our highways, right? Where we put our commercial and our industrial industries, and that has been intentionally put in communities of color, and highways being used to actually be as physical barriers for protecting white communities. It's also, thinking about our culture, creating a car culture, which we're responding to that. So that it contributes to the built environment and to the conclusions, and trying to backtrack out of that. It's quite interesting when we're used to thinking that, a system that was built for people to come into the city from the suburbs, right, in and out, and then trying to figure out other ways. And there are other ways to do it, but it hasn't been in the interest of the car industry, and so it doesn't get changed.
That's good. Vatic, saw you nodding. Do you have thoughts on the built environment and the impact on health?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm just like agreeing so much with what Dr. Ritchie is sharing with us, and just thinking about that built environment. I think for me, it always comes back to power, and like as we're talking about justice, or we're talking about undoing racism and all these other things, we got to look at power, and we got to look at how do people who are most impacted have power to choose the built environment, right? So you mentioned highways, right? How were the communities that were involved in that have power to choose where those highways would go, right? Who has the choice of saying, oh, we actually even need a highway, right? It's like that's a military infrastructure, right? That's what they needed so that they can make sure tanks can go a certain, you know what I'm saying? Like they have to be wide enough for tanks. They have to be a certain amount of straightaways for airplanes, right? So that's militarization that is really in the interest of, corporations, right? Like it's not necessarily in the interest of regular people for you know what I'm saying, for the most part. Like some like with the suburbs and stuff like that, but that wasn't like the first thought that they were having. So like I would say, like, digging into like the reasons why we're making the decisions, and as we're moving forward, making sure that the most impacted share power and share responsibility for developing the built infrastructure. So like thinking about also some of the other ways that it impacts us is indoor air quality, right? So like I mentioned, I said earlier that I was in Providence. I'm not in Providence. You caught me. I'm in Boston right now. And so I work with this group, and we did work with the city of Boston on their building emissions ordinance, right? And so a lot of the air pollution, a lot of like the carbon like that's being released is from buildings, right? And so we see a lot of like the PM, like the particulate matter and other polluting happening inside of buildings. And so like I mentioned asthma and things like that. And so like things like our stoves, right? Like our gas stoves or our gas water heaters are things that are polluting us. And so like I remember as a young person, we had a gas stove, and it was supposed to be the thing, everybody wanted to have gas stoves, but little did we know that it was connected to my asthma, right? And my brother's asthma and my mother's asthma actually causing it, right? And so the built environment is definitely impacting our health.
Yeah. So do we think, asthma is something that comes up as one of the health impacts of environment. Are there other health impacts that you're aware of or can point to? And I also think in terms of physical health, but also mental health. Sometimes we don't think about the mental health impacts of some of what people have to live with every day, but I think that's an important component.
I would say, you can look at waste management and toxic waste, where it goes, how it's contaminated our lands, and and one of the things that was when I started to talk about was zoning and land use, and understanding that actually zoning was used to create segregated communities for African Americans, since they were designated as the place to actually build the industries and the commercial usage. I mean, it was as early as, like 1938 that the General Accounting Office concluded that national waste treatment facilities and uncontrolled waste dumps were more likely to be found in African American communities rather than white residential areas. And it was a strong predictor of where waste facilities could be found. You could have 89% or higher of minority populations are living near incinerators. So that's another area for particulate matter. Of course, you have the particulate matter of the highways. Also, and that chance of being near an incinerator doesn't just happen. It's like it would be 1 in 10,000 chance for it to be for the racial distribution to have those them there. And so if you're also thinking about what the area looks like, so this is the degradation of, they're put in these areas because they're going to cause more degradation to the housing in that facility. So you're protecting some neighborhoods while you're not protecting others. And so that's not going to have, if anybody ever has lived near an industrial site, tree canopy, all of these things also don't or contribute to where one lives and how one feels about where they're living.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just add, you asked if there are other things other than asthma, and I mean, there's also its connection to contributing to deaths of heart disease, lung cancer, strokes. There's so much to the air pollution and contributing that is just when you dig into it, once you start getting into that hole, there's just more and more and more. And it's so important because there's all this preventable death. There are things that we could prevent. And we know we can, but we're making a choice, or not you and I, we're not the ones making the decision, right? But there are people making a decision for us with our tax dollars to choose not to prevent these deaths.
I would also say, when you think about our food, right? We're
Mhm.
talking about the Southside Community Land Trust. Looking at soil remediation, the DM will tell you, don't even try, right? Don't try. You build up or put other soil on top, cover and put other soil on top. It is this, we can't even have land for growing food, for nurturing ourselves. And yeah, so those are other ways that it impacts our health.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so Vatic, when you think about kind of, you've done a lot of sort of activist and advocacy work on this area in Providence, what are some of the big Providence specific issues? We've talked about the highway, but are there other issues or other parts of our infrastructure that really have a significant impact?
I mean, I really wish that Monica was here because we could talk about the port. The big push right now, and I think Linda, I see her, Linda Perry, she's in there, the port. So I think that is, and so when we're talking about Providence Port, it's not just the company known as Provport and the ones who work on that, but it's also the other industries that are out there, these other toxic industries that are there that you wouldn't want to have in your neighborhood, but they are in neighborhoods, right? They are affecting neighborhoods. So as I was getting on the train today, so I live in the North End, and so I walked downtown, and there's a smell that you smell downtown, right? And it wafts over and into the air, right? And it's really impacting and it's really harmful for the community. And there's been a lot of pushing to change the zoning laws so that we do not have those type of toxic facilities in our community, right? So these are facilities that, they wouldn't allow them in Boston. They wouldn't allow them in Connecticut, but they're here in Providence, right? And so I think that is one of the main ones that I would lift up.
Okay, yeah. Danny, is there anything that you're aware of that has a significant impact from?
The significant impact is the long legacy of segregation, of having created segregated communities. When I talk about housing and land and land use and policy, housing work describes Providence as like a tale of two cities. There's the east side and then there's the west side of the highway. And when you look at the maps, you can see again where the industrial sites are. So that's, and I know that I understand that they say that they're looking at those alleys, those lanes, but I don't know if they actually really connect it to this legacy of residential segregation. And how.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that kind of gets to what are the solutions and how do we start to think about them? Because so much of this was built up over a long time, and it's really hard to, I think you said this, Danny, it's really hard to undo what's been done. So what do either one of you see as some of are there any quick fixes to anything?
It's not a quick fix. I think about how the highway was put up to block, right? And to separate. But when they changed the highways, they moved it and then they reconnected. And the problem with that is that we've got a great walkway now that connects the east side to the jewelry district and gets into the upper south side, but that sets us up for gentrification. So what we need to do in the short term is understand what we need to do in order to protect people where they're living, so that we stop gentrification. But this is part of understanding the history and how this started, and so that we can then understand how it perpetuates through now this discussion of development, redevelopment of these areas without a sight of looking at how you're setting up for displacement.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Vatic, before I ask you to weigh in on that as well, I just want to remind everyone that, you can put your questions in the chat. I'm sure that everybody's listening to this has got a lot of questions that are sort of bubbling up, and just put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. But Vatic, what kind of solutions are you focused on or working on for some of this?
Yeah, and just to reiterate, there are no quick fixes, right? But there are ways that we could change things in our lifetime. But I think something that's huge, and if we were going to say, okay, what could we do if we had the will and snap our fingers to make a big change? And thinking about Providence specifically, so understanding understanding that our infrastructure of government and how we have our government, and before we can change it and have a different type of governance, right? We could look at the way things are, and we can restructure the way that our government institutions are designed to help us and do things. So for instance, in Providence, we have a new mayor, but we also have, we have this old institution of, public safety, right? And so there's this idea of public safety. And if we think about it or talk about what are the things that are killing us, right? The number one killers is I think it's heart disease is number one. I think cancer, and then COVID, and then it's you know what I'm saying? There's some other things, right? But as we go down, the things that are affected by public safety are not in the top 10, right? Of things that are killing us. However, in Providence, we spend over $80 million a year on these people's salaries, and they're not keeping us alive, right? So I think that if we were to put that money into community health workers, if we were able to put that money into like actual programs that would focus on the health of our community, then we would be in a much better situation than we are right now.
Well, and I think you make a very interesting point, and maybe you can both speak to this. It's really, there is an education component to this for the people who have to live with it. And how are we informing people of some of the hazards that they live with every day? Is everybody really aware, or are they, like you say, heart disease and cancer and all these other things, and are they aware of what's impacting them and any little things they could do? Danny, do you have any thoughts on that?
Little things you could do. Oh my God. So, I'm pretty much a crazy environmental type person, and I recycle everything, and I try to like not use any plastic. And those are tough things for a lot of people, because it's really hard when you just go down the grocery aisle, grocery store aisle, and everything is in plastic. And anyway, if you're obsessed with that, then you take that in. So, really just asking for these simple things like, stopping the use of plastic, trying to figure out how to create asking for public transportation, decent public transportation, creating bike lanes, having other modes of transportation. These are, those are the things, some of the things that I do. Now, of course, for me, the individual, we have to make sure that we're not trying to just put it on the individuals, because it's the industries that are creating this, right? We talked about Proport. Well, that's a nonprofit that the city has some control over, but then there's all these other industries over there that are not under that control. And so we have to figure out ways to actually address that too, as a society, as a part of our civic duty.
Yeah. Vatic, have you been involved in any educational efforts with the community to really get them to understand what they live with?
Of course, we do education, but I think, education is just, it's empty without action. So like any education that I want to be involved in is going to be connected to some sort of program that is going to move us forward. So we've done work with the Green Justice Zones. And so me, Monica, and then I worked with a nonprofit called One Square World. We brought together the Office of Sustainability, DEM, EPA, as well as some other government stakeholders, as well as community folks. So Mama Rafini was one of those folks. So we had two cohorts. We had a cohort for Southside, and we also had a cohort for Oldeyville, and worked with them and started out with education, but then developed a model for what a green justice zone would look like and what that structure would do and what kind of powers it would hold, right? And so Monica was really instrumental in that. And so they have taken that, and now they have legislation that is going to be reintroduced at the state level, right? And so those are the things I'm interested in. I'm interested in how do we do education and also do base building, right? Because as we were saying before, it's like, at the individual level, it's like, it's not just the individual. We can't solve this by ourselves. So that's why it's good we have, 33 other people participating in this conversation. We have other people outside of this. We have people being born into this conversation, right? And so we have to understand that there's no quick fix, but this is a generational struggle that we're a piece of.
Right. Yeah. And Vatic, I know you do a lot of work, sort of like you're in Boston now, and you've done work for other cities as well. Are there models out there that you see that you would just love Providence to be able to take on?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the green justice zones, and that's modeled after, there are green municipalities and green zones in other states and other places like that. But I really feel like, Providence and what we have been doing is oftentimes folks will look at Providence and the work that we've done, especially with the REJC, is like founding stage. People will look at that as a model for how to like move about and how to shift power. So thinking about, so yeah, I don't have another answer to that, but I'll pass it to you, Dr. Ritchie, if you have something.
No, that's great what you said. Like, I mean, I think I just want to reiterate the issue around that it's beyond education. There's always this thing, oh, you just have to inform people, they just have to be aware. But most people don't, so you give them the information and then what do you do? Right. And a lot of times we don't have the practice of how to act on it. So having organizations that are active and are organized to do work and to take action, that's usually what we need to be doing. And so the work that Vatic and the racial justice, environmental justice group are doing is trying to create, because they're calling the environmental zoning is environmental justice zones to kind of undo what has been done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know we talked earlier about, the highways and other infrastructures that sort of segregate communities and were designed or intended to displace people and et cetera. And that's not unique to Providence. That is something that highways have done throughout this country. So have you seen any other community that's really trying to do anything to mitigate or I guess try to reconnect?
Yeah, there are people that are like out in California. So out in Oakland, I know that folks have they have even developed plans around capping the highway system out there. And so we could share that out to folks later on. But if you look it up, there's like some beautiful graphics of like what it would look like if you were to like build to cap the highway, and it's like the highway will be in a tunnel, and then there's like a park on top of it with like trees and a walkway. And so there are things that people are imagining, and I think that in Pittsburgh they're doing some work like that as well, and they've actually started doing work on those things. And so there is some hope around the highway side of things, and there's ways to do it.
Right. Yeah. I guess that was a little bit what the Big Dig did in Boston as well. They capped the highway and put in a park. So yeah, and I think I think that idea of just trying to figure out how to reconnect people, like you say, across or over the highway, it's a fascinating topic. So I always think that advocacy is a slow and iterative and can be very stressful work, because you have to always be bringing people along. And then, I'm sure both of you have had that experience where you feel like you're making progress and then the players change.
Mm.
And you feel like you have to start all over again. And so how do you keep all that going? Do you have any tricks or sort of ways that you help yourself and help others understand that we are making progress, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way?
No. Sorry. It's just one foot in front of the other, and just making sure that you're constant. That's the base about it. And I hope that you don't burn out in the process.
Yeah, Vatic, how do you keep yourself going?
Yeah, what motivates me is understanding that there's not a quick fix, understanding that we have to, it wasn't, it's been 400 or so years that we've been living under this system of white supremacy. And so, we're at this part of it, and we still have further to go. So that motivates me. Children motivate me. I really enjoy being around young people. Art and music and culture, all those things motivate me. But when I'm connecting with different players in certain positions of power, and how those things may change within government or they may change within organizations, I think that what's really important is relationships. And so like recognizing and understanding that we're building relationships with people and continuing those relationships, I think are really important, and not getting lost in like the transactional way that we can get lost around each other. So what was really valuable about our process with the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee is like we took like several years of getting to know the different players in our spaces and like in a real relational way, like having meals, like going on trips and things like that. And so we knew them differently than being in a board meeting type of thing. So that helped for us to go further and have a deeper trust. And so for me, I think it's really important to build networks. And so when we are doing works with institutions or we're doing work with the city, it's important for us to build the base with the residents in the community and make sure that that we're a bridge and not a gatekeeper, right? And so what I mean by bridge is like, if you are going to a meeting in the city or you're invited to a thing, who else are you bringing with you? Who else in your community are you involving so that it's not you by yourself just bringing the information back, right? So it's like, how are we putting other people in position to step up and we're taking space, but we're also making space for other people.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Yeah.
So that's creating a participatory process and always being mindful of it. Always being mindful of it.
Yeah. You know, Vatic, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is because I know you are also engaged in the arts community, and how do you see art helping or impacting this work on environmental justice?
Yes, art impacts a lot of our life. It impacts like most of our life, and if you ever watch, the infotainer like John Oliver, he has a good piece where he talks about Law and Order, the TV show Law and Order, and it's like one of the like best watched TV series. Like I think it was like one of my mom's favorite shows, and we think about how that is propaganda for the police department and how successful that has been for the police department. So art plays a big role in us being able to imagine what our reality is. And oftentimes with artists, we don't hold ourselves into like account for how powerful our creativity is. And so within the, environmental justice space, the art that I've been creating or have been able to create with like REJC and also with like One Square World and some of the other projects has been a way to like translate some of the technical things into emotion. So with art, we're taking it, and so like taking a conversation about asthma and air pollution and then putting it in someone's lungs, right? Putting it into something that you understand and you can connect with. So with REJC, we did these future stories that were connected to the climate justice plan that we did with the city. And there were 9 different points, but we had 9 different monologues where people would share on like in the future, in 2040, what does it look like because this policy has changed, right? And so it's a way of allowing people to step into that reality and to imagine, what would the world look like? What would Providence look like? What would Providence look like if we didn't have police officers, but we had community health workers? What does that look like? And so I worked on a project called Moral Docs where we did just that. And we created a virtual reality space where people could go to that training session. What does it look like to have a training session that's directly talking to nurturing, right? And so what does that world look like? And that's what I think artists are supposed to do.
And we are getting some questions in the chat, which I'd like to put forth. One of them kind of speaks to that imagining. Today in the Boston Globe, they had an article on redevelopment without displacement and the conditions necessary in a community to do it. Rhode Island seems unwilling to look at these issues. Any thoughts on how to change this?
So I saw that question earlier, and it's hard to say, but I mean, to me, it seems that we have a mindset in Rhode Island that really doesn't acknowledge the damage that's been done. And And so they want to continue the same path of continuing to try to work on development with, and just think that that can be everything. And the answer, and I mean, do I know it, enough, but is it that there's vested interests that aren't interested in looking at those other issues because they might feel that the benefits that they will get from the redevelopment could be jeopardized. So how do we change that? I think just by continuing to have that conversation and understanding what that history is, and making sure that people understand that when you're hurting and you're creating more disparities, you're really hurting yourself too. Of course, they're not hurting the people as much as, those that are the most vulnerable or the most impacted, but it still makes a toxic environment for everybody, not just for the, in terms of toxicity that's through toxic industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too much more to add. I would just say, it has to, like, we have to be like honest about what motivates us as a society, like as a city, like as an administration, we have to be honest about it. And if it was like, if we actually believed that everybody had a right to live in the city, that's in the city, we would find a way, right, to keep people here in the city, right? However, we may not see it as a human right for people to have housing or for people to like be able to stay in their hometown and not be pushed out. And so I think that a lot of that is connected to this idea of what capitalism is. And so I think that if we can have a conversation about, like freedom and like reality and how we can control our own realities and not have someone else control our realities, or someone hundreds of years ago choosing the economic system that we have today, I think that we could go further and talk about how we don't displace people. So, I think, so I'll just leave it at that, and I'll just leave it at that, and it makes space for more conversation. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank, there's a lively chat with some people sharing links, which I hope people will follow. Another question is there legislation in the pipeline in Rhode Island that we should be supporting? And I think I would also ask at the city level as well, or specific policies in the works that people should know about and be following and learning about and advocating for.
Yeah, the main one is the Green Justice Zone piece, and I don't have that right now to like share with folks. I didn't know that Monica wasn't going to be here, but I think that there may be people that are in the chat that could like maybe share that link to that piece of legislation on the state level. But I don't know of anything right now, city level.
And maybe as a follow-up, who are the leaders in our city and state government on these issues? Who are the people who are trying to think actively about these, so to be working with them?
Are you saying who are the leaders that we need to hear?
Yeah, who should, there are usually certain elected officials who are very interested and keen on these issues and are, trying to figure out solutions, trying to figure out what the policy changes that should happen. Who are the people you're turning to and making those allies with?
I mean, I would say that folks need to reach out to like your representatives, your state representative, your state senator, your council person, going to the council meetings, staying up to date in those spaces. I would say that with this Green Justice Zone and Environmental Justice Act, I would like really talk to them and say that you're really interested in this, Green Justice Zone and Environmental Justice Act. They should be supporting it. They should become a sponsor of it as it's being introduced. And then also just, just stay as connected as they possibly can to like the People's Port Authority and other initiatives that activists are pushing in our neighborhoods.
I didn't hear specific names of representatives. I know a few, but I'm not necessarily feeling comfortable with naming them right now because of.
Yeah, this couple have ended up in the chat that people are adding, so
Okay.
so that's great. Thank you. So another question we have, this initial about, realized I missed it earlier, but about the Washington Park in South Providence being a frontline community, and what are solutions for that community besides planting trees? And if there are things, and in addition to things that you've already addressed or tailored to that community.
Man, I'm not going to talk for the Southside. So if you have any thoughts.
Again, I'm not privy to understanding that issue, so there isn't much I can add to it right now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. We respect you not trying to make up things that, and to be truth to those communities. So we have a few minutes for other questions from the chat, but Mary Frances, I also know you had a number of questions in the queue for this conversation as well.
Right. I think one of the questions that I have is, when we think about climate change and how climate change might, what layer that's going to add onto the environment as we go forward, particularly as it feels like the efforts to mitigate climate change on a international or even a national level aren't having the impact. I think there was something, again, in the paper about that today. But so as you look forward, what are you most worried about with a changing climate and how that's going to impact Providence and the people who live here?
Well, we know that there's coastally that the rising sea level is going to severely impact Rhode Island, and as those people move further in, which they're going to have to, what disruption is that going to have to some of our core cities?
And I suppose, how do we make sure that we don't displace communities when people who live along the coast decide they need to come to higher ground, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the rivers, so like that is a thing. So like not even just people on the coast, but also like there'll be other things. There's a hurricane barrier for downtown, but not for anywhere else. So I think there's definitely the flooding issue, and then also something I think about is heat. And so like the heat waves, but also like that's connected to energy. And so, we all just kind of came through winter. We got this community choice aggregation that's going right now, which hopefully is going to be a great thing for all of us. And we'll get some good rates, and eventually we'll get some good companies that we'll be buying energy from. But yeah, I think about the energy prices and like how expensive it is to keep ourselves warm in the winter. And I'm afraid of what the next, like what does it look like in the future? The prices are going to go higher. It's going to be hotter in the summertime. And then we have to have AC, and I'm worried about our elders. I'm worried about people being too hot, but also not having the money to keep themselves cool. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, So we've got this future, and then of course we've got this past. We've talked about some of the decisions that were made in the past that impact where we are now, but some of them, things like the rivers being polluted because there was a lot of industry along the river and they just would dump their chemicals into the river. And those things are still there 100 years later.
Mhm. Right.
So are we making good decisions now? That do you think that people 100 years from now are going to be saying, they were really smart? Or are they going to be saying, oh my gosh, what were they thinking?
Well, we see what they're doing in terms of redevelopment. So unfortunately, it's freedom is a constant struggle, really.
Yeah, yeah,
You have to just keep working on chipping at it.
right. Vatic, do you see anything as you look to the future that you are hopeful about? Or I think we sort of talked a little bit about that, or you're really concerned about? You talked some, but anything we haven't addressed yet?
I mean, yeah, I'm hopeful that some of the things that we talked about today, some of like the work that we're doing in community with different programs and the Green Justice Zones and the Green Justice Zone and Environmental Justice Act, that those things will take hold. It may not be this session, it may not be this year, but those things will take hold eventually, and we will be able to make a lasting impression. And the work that we're doing, like this conversation is recorded, so hopefully like people will look back at this at 100 years, if there's still an internet in 100 years, and be like, okay, they were onto something. They like laid the groundwork for us changing how we budget our public safety, right? Maybe that is something that will happen. But the decisions that are being made today, like we see all these train derailments, right? Like another environmental thing, as I was getting on the train today, the train was late because it was behind a freight train, right? And then we're all waiting for our train and everything, right? And so 15 minutes, they're like, you gotta go back up. You gotta go inside the train station. We're like, why? They're like, this freight train is carrying diesel and all this other stuff, so you can't be down there, right? Because it's so dangerous for you to even be down there while it's passing by. So, the people who are making decisions on the train line, people are going to look back and be like, that's how could they even transport that stuff around people's communities? People are going to look back and be like, that's insane, right? But the things that we're talking about in this conversation, I am hopeful that folks will look back on this and be like, Dr. Ritchie, Vatic, Mary, you are all onto something.
I'd like to just really, because I know we're going to close out soon. There are a couple of things that Vatic said that hinted to us issues around changing from being a transactional society to collaborative and relationship, building relationship and building network. And those are things that we really need to be being aware of, that are guiding the decision makers. We are and have always been extractive. And I use that word because that's what we do to the ground, and that's what we do to people to get resources for a very few, for the benefit of a very few. And we have to stop that. So if we understand that we are not changing policies because we want to continue this system of extraction for profit and for benefit, and that we have to change our relationships. We have to change from being a transactional to being a relationship-based society. And definitely, the arts are necessary, but they're also necessary for our children too, so they can be better thinkers and they can develop more and have more solutions for tomorrow.
So do you have a quick final call to action? We've got all these people listening in. What can they go off and do besides, with their legislators? Anything else?
Fight for public education and arts.
Just same thing, same. I'll just double onto that. So appreciate the time.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, I really think that someone, when the world is, the people who show up, stand up and speak up like you all do is really an important part of our democracy. And there's something we cannot lose. We may not always agree with each other, but we need people who believe and are willing to say what they believe and fight for it. So I really want to tell you how much I appreciate what you both do in that regard. It's really great. So thank you.
I want to thank you too so much. This has been a really interesting and lively conversation and thoughtful questions. And you've given us just good food to think about. And thank you to everybody who put in the chat, because there were lots of interesting links and discussion items in there. And I also want to thank our program partners, Providence League of Women Voters, Southside Community Land Trust, and our media sponsor, Eco RI News. We also will be sending out a short survey and hope that you will fill that out to help us in our planning and program development. And have a good night, and please stay engaged, stay connected, and be well out there.